Dim the lights and let the world fall away. You're entering Dreadloop, Creepypasta, where the silence feels heavier, and every story pulls you deeper into the dark. If you enjoy these dark stories, subscribe, and return when the night feels longest. Now settle and breathe slowly, and listen closely. Tonight's tale begins now. The first time the slot gave me a death certificate, the person wasn't dead yet. I'd been at the Licking County Recorder's office for 2 months when it happened. Newark, Ohio. County Courthouse, an 1870s limestone building renovated the way government buildings get renovated. Drop ceilings stapled over plaster medallions. Fluorescent tubes zip-tied to fixtures that once held gas lamps. Burned out on 6 years of contract cataloging work for university libraries, the kind of career where you're technically a professional, but your email expires every 11 months. The county listing said, permanent. I believed it. I took it. My supervisor was a woman named Gail Rennert, who had worked for the county for 22 years. She was efficient in the way of someone who had long ago stopped distinguishing between her personality and her job. She was thorough. She was patient. She told me I'd be bored within 6 weeks and content within 6 months, and that both of those things were the point. She was right about the boredom. The work was mechanical. Receive a document, verify the information, assign an index number, file the physical copy, update the digital record. Deeds, liens, mortgages, plats, military discharges, birth certificates, death certificates, marriage, licenses. The paper history of a county, organized and maintained so that anyone who needed to prove something, ownership, identity, kinship, death, could find the proof. I liked it more than I expected. There was something calming about the completeness of it. Every transaction had a place. Every document had a number. I understood systems like that. I'd spent my career inside them, the sealed records. Room was on the basement level, past the general storage area where the overflow filing cabinets lived. I learned about it during my second week. Gail walked me through the basement as part of orientation rows of metal shelving, banker's boxes labeled by year and document type, the climate-controlled vault where the oldest plat maps were kept, in acid-free folders. At the far end of the basement, past the vault, there was a steel door with a combination lock. No window, a laminated sign taped to it read authorized personnel only in county letterhead. Sealed records, Gail said. Court orders mostly. Juvenile cases, expunged convictions, adoption files, some mental health commitments from before. The law changed. You won't need to go in there. Linda handles those, and only when a judge requests a retrieval. I asked how often that happened. Gail said maybe 3 or 4 times a year. I didn't think about it again until I noticed the slot dot. It was on the wall to the right of the sealed records door. A brass mail slot, the old-fashioned horizontal kind, set into the limestone about waist height. Above it, engraved into a small brass plate that had gone dark with tarnish, were the words "Return to File." The engraving was old. The lettering style looked original to the building, 1870s or 1880s. The slot itself was functional. The brass flap moved when I touched it. Behind the flap was darkness and a faint draft, like the slot opened into a space with its own airflow. I asked Gail about it. She glanced at it and said, "Interdepartmental." Back when the building had more offices down here, clerks from upstairs could drop documents through for refiling without coming all the way down. I asked where the documents went, what was on the other side of the wall. Gail said, "The sealed room, I think. Or the space behind it. I've never really looked." She said it the way people say things they've decided not to be curious about. Not evasive. Just finished. I let it go. For the first 2 months, my work kept me on the first and second floors. I went to the basement occasionally to retrieve older files from the general storage shelves, but I never had reason to go past the vault. The sealed records door stayed shut. I saw Linda go down there once, carrying a brown expandable folder with a judge's retrieval order paper clipped to the front. She was down there for maybe 20 minutes and came back without the folder. I asked if she needed help. She said no. She said it was a simple pull and return, and that sealed records were best handled by one person at a time. Fewer eyes, fewer complications. I didn't find that strange. Sealed records are sealed for a reason. Confidentiality in a recorder's office isn't theater. It's law. What I found strange was the first time I saw something come out of the slot. It was a Thursday in late May. I'd gone down to the basement to pull a 2011 mortgage release from general storage. The shelving for 2010 through 2015 was close to the back wall, maybe 30 feet from the sealed records door. I was crouched between rows, looking for the right box, when I heard the brass flap clap shut. A small, sharp sound. Metal on metal. The kind of sound a mail slot makes when something passes through it. I stood up and looked. On the floor beneath the slot, face down on the concrete, was a single sheet of paper. I walked over and picked it up. It was a death certificate. County form, proper stock, embossed seal. I checked the information. The decedent was a woman named Ruth Alden Cole, age 81. Date of death, May 22nd, cause cardiopulmonary arrest secondary to metastatic pancreatic cancer. Attending physician listed, funeral home listed, burial location listed. Everything filled. Incorrectly, every field complete. The filing date at the top was stamped 2 days from now. I stood there for a while. The filing date was the only wrong thing on the document. The stamp said Saturday. I assumed it was a misprint, a stamping machine with the wrong date loaded. It happens. Gail had told me the old mechanical date stamps drifted if you didn't reset them. I took the certificate upstairs and left it on Linda's desk with a sticky note. Found this on the basement floor near sealed records. Looks like it came through the return slot. Filing date is wrong. Linda thanked me the next morning. She said she'd corrected the date and filed it. She said the slot sometimes caught old documents that worked loose from the shell's vibrations from the boiler. Shifting foundations, that sort of thing. Paper shifts. Ruth Alden Cole died on Saturday. I know because I processed her death certificate the following Monday when the funeral home submitted it. Same name, same age, same cause of death, same attending physician. The certificate I'd found on the basement floor 2 days before her. Death was identical to the one that came in through the normal channels 2 days after. I pulled the original from the files. It wasn't there. I checked the digital index. No record of it. I asked Linda. She looked at me blankly. She said she didn't remember any sticky note, any certificate, any conversation about a misprint. She wasn't lying. She genuinely didn't remember. I told myself I was confused. I'd been tired that week, adjusting to the commute, staying up too late reading. Maybe I'd conflated 2 different documents. Maybe the dates were different than I remembered. Memory is unreliable, I know that. I've spent my professional life organizing information precisely because human recall is not precise. But I hadn't imagined the brass flap. I'd heard it close. Over the next several weeks, I started paying attention to the slot in a way I hadn't before. I found excuses to go to the basement retrieving files, checking climate readings in the vault, restocking supply shelves that didn't need restocking. I'd walk past the sealed records door and look at the floor beneath the return slot. Most days, nothing. The floor was bare concrete, dusty, undisturbed. On June 14th, I found a marriage license. Same situation. Lying on the floor beneath the slot, face down, fully completed. The couple's names were Michael Orrin Tandy and Sarah Beth Comstock. Marriage date, June 19th. I checked the county records. No marriage license application had been filed for either name. I checked the digital index. Nothing. I called the license office upstairs and asked casually, Like I was helping with a filing question, whether anyone named Tandy or Comstock had applied for a license recently. They checked. No, I put the license in my desk drawer. I didn't tell anyone. On June 19th, Michael Tandy and Sarah Comstock applied for and received a marriage license at the counter on the first floor. I know because I was the clerk who processed it. They were a young couple, nervous, holding hands. He kept patting his jacket pocket where the rings were. She laughed at everything he said, even when nothing was funny. They were ordinary. They were real. The information on the license they applied for matched the document in my desk drawer in every detail except one: the license number. The one from the slot had a number that was 6 digits higher than any number currently in our sequence. Number that, at our filing rate, we wouldn't reach for about 4 years. I went home that night and sat in my car in the parking lot of my apartment complex for 30 minutes before going inside. I wasn't frightened exactly. I was trying to identify what I was feeling, and the closest I could get was a kind of structural vertigo, the sensation that the system I'd spent 2 months learning was not the system I thought it was, that it had a dimension I hadn't been trained on, that it was doing something I hadn't been told about. I went back to the slot the next day. I brought a flashlight and held it up to the brass flap and opened it as far as it would go and looked inside. The slot extended about 8 inches into the wall. The limestone was thick and opened into darkness on the other side. I couldn't see a floor or shelving or any surface where documents might land. The flashlight beam just went into the dark and stopped meaning anything. The draft was still there, faint and cool, carrying the smell I recognized from every archive I'd ever worked in: old paper, calcium carbonate, the foxing sweetness of slow decomposition. But underneath it, something else, something I didn't have a word for. A mineral smell, like wet chalk, but with a warmth to it that mineral smells don't usually have. I let the flap close. I stood there for a moment. Then I did something I shouldn't have done. I went back to my desk, took a blank sheet of county letterhead, wrote my full name on it, Mara Elise Olenek, and nothing else. Went back to the basement and fed it through. The slot. The brass flap clapped shut behind it. The sound was the same as before, small, sharp, final. No rustle, just the faint movement of air. I went back upstairs and tried to work. I couldn't concentrate. I kept thinking about the sheet of paper with my name on it, falling through darkness, landing somewhere I couldn't see. I felt like I'd mailed a letter without knowing the address, and now couldn't take it back. 3 days later, I found a document on the floor beneath the slot. It was a single page, county stock, formatted like an index card, but full-sized. At the top, in the same typeface used on all county forms, it said Olenek, Mara Elise. Below that were 2 columns. The left column was labeled Filed and contained a list of dates and document types: my birth certificate, my social security registration, my college transcripts notarization, my marriage license from 2019, my divorce filing from 2023, every document I'd ever generated that would pass through a county or state records system. The right column was labeled pending. It contained 3 entries. The first was a deed transfer dated 8 months from now for a property I didn't own at an address I didn't recognize. The second was a name change filing, also future dated, changing my surname to one I'd never heard, Voss. The third entry was just a date, no document type, no description. Just a date, 14 months from now. And next to it, in small type, see attached. There was no attachment. I stood in the basement holding that page, and I felt something I can only describe as a calm so total it frightened me, not peace absence. As if every anxious impulse in my body had been filed away, and what was left was just the physical fact of me standing in a basement, holding a piece of paper that knew my future. I took it upstairs. I put it in my desk drawer with the marriage license. I locked the drawer. I went to the bathroom and washed my hands and looked at my face in the mirror and saw that I looked exactly the same as I had that morning, which seemed impossible because I no longer felt like the same person. Something had been indexed. Something about me had been processed by a system I worked inside of but did not control. That evening, I drove to the address listed on the deed transfer. It was a house on the north side of Newark, a small bungalow with a porch and a detached garage on a street of similar houses. It had a for sale sign in the yard. I sat in my car and looked at it. It was a normal house. Yellow siding, brown trim, a maple tree in the front yard that needed pruning. There was nothing wrong with it. There was nothing about it that suggested anything. But I already knew I was going to buy it. Not because the document told me to, because I wanted to. I looked at that house, and I wanted it in a way that felt pre-decided. Like remembering a preference rather than forming one. I drove home. I didn't buy the house. Not yet. But I looked up the listing that night. 3 bedrooms, 1 bath, 1,100 square feet. Asking price well within what I could afford with a county salary. I bookmarked it. I told myself I bookmarked a lot of things. The next morning I went straight to the basement. No pretense of needing a file. I went to the slot and I stood in front of it and I waited. I don't know what I was waiting for. The brass flap didn't move. The air came through, faint and cool, carrying that chalk and paper smell. I put my hand flat against the wall beside the slot and felt the limestone under my palm. The building was 150 years old. It had been holding records longer than anyone currently alive in the county. I tried to think about that, about the volume of documentation that had passed through this space. The births and deaths and marriages and property lines and court orders and name changes and all of it. Every paper fact of every paper life, indexed and stored and maintained in a system built from stone and metal and human habit. I tried to think about what a system like that becomes after 150 years of continuous operation. Whether the act of recording can develop its own momentum. Whether a catalog, fed enough information for long enough, starts to anticipate. I went upstairs. I worked my shift. I processed 12 documents that day, 8 deed recordings, 2 death certificates, a lien release, and a military discharge. Each one I handled with the same care as always. But I was aware, now that I was feeding something, that every form I filed, every index number I assigned, every record I entered into the digital system that mirrored the physical system that mirrored whatever the system behind the slot was. I was maintaining an organism, not a creature, not anything with intent in the way people mean when they say that word, but something with process. Something that moved information in directions I hadn't consented to. I told Gail I wanted to learn the sealed records procedures. She looked at me the way she sometimes did, evaluating whether my interest was professional or something else. She said sealed records required court authorization. She said Linda had been handling them for 15 years. She said there was no operational reason for me to be trained on them. I said I wanted to understand the full scope of the office. She said the full scope of the office was what she'd already shown me. I went to Linda directly. Linda was 53, quiet, precise, and had the particular guardedness of someone who works alone with sensitive documents. I asked her about the sealed records room, not the procedures, but the room itself, what it looked like, how it was organized, whether the return slot opened into it. Linda looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "The slot doesn't open into the sealed room." I asked where it opened. She said, "I don't know. The wall on the other side of the slot is solid. I've looked. There's no opening on the interior side. The slot goes into the limestone and stops. Or it goes somewhere else. I've worked here 15 years, and I've never found where it goes." I asked her if she'd ever found documents on the floor beneath it. Linda closed her office door. She sat down. She said, "Twice, both times in my first year." The first was a birth certificate for an infant who hadn't been born yet. I filed it because I didn't know what else to do. The child was born 3 weeks later. Same name, same parents, same hospital, same date. When the actual certificate came in through normal channels, I went to pull my filed copy and it was gone. Not misfiled, gone. As if the system had absorbed it once the real one arrived. I asked about the second time. A death certificate, Linda said. For me. She said it without drama. She said it like she was telling me about a parking ticket. The certificate had her name, her date of birth, a date of death 4 years in the future, and a cause she declined to share with me. She said she didn't file it. She burned it in the parking lot. She said the date on the certificate was now 2 years past and she was still alive, and she chose to believe that meant the document was wrong, but she said it in a way that made me think she wasn't sure the document was wrong so much as she was sure that destroying it had changed something. As if the system could be edited. As if you could refuse a filing. I went to the basement that afternoon and I took the page with my name on it. The one with the deed transfer and the name change and the bear date with C attached, and I fed it back through the slot. I pushed it through the brass flap and I heard it disappear into the dark on the other side. I was returning it to the file. I was rejecting the entry. I was telling the system no. The next morning, the page was on the floor beneath the slot again, identical. Unchanged. Except the date in the pending column, the bare date with no document type, had moved closer by 3 weeks. I picked it up. I looked at it. I put it in my pocket. I went upstairs and worked my shift. I processed 9 documents. I ate lunch at my desk. I answered 4 phone calls from the public. I left at 5. I drove to the house on the north side of Newark, the yellow bungalow with the maple tree, and I sat in my car and I looked at it and I called the number on the for sale sign. I'm telling you this not because I'm asking for help. I'm telling you because I need someone to understand what it feels like to be inside a system that has already decided your next entries. The house, the name change, the final date, none of them have happened yet. But I can feel them in the same way I can feel a document's place in the index before I assign it. The rightness of the sequence. The way each entry follows the last. In an order that is not random. I used to think I chose this job. I used to think I walked into the recorder's office because I needed stability and benefits and a pension. Now I think the office filed me. I think it opened a record the day I was born, and it's been updating it ever since, and the slot in the basement wall is not a mail drop but an interface, a place where the system shows you your own card and lets you see how far it's gotten and how many entries remain before your file is complete. I still work there. I go in every morning at 8. I process documents. I maintain the index. I am good at my job. Gail told me last week that she's recommending me for Linda's position when Linda retires next year. I said I'd be honored. I haven't been back to the slot in 3 weeks. I don't need to. The draft comes up through the floor now. I can feel it at my desk, faint and cool, carrying the smell of old paper and something else, something warm and mineral and patient. The system doesn't need me to visit. I'm already in it. I've always been in it. Every document I process adds to the index, and the index includes me. And the slot is just the place where the boundary between the catalog and the catalog gets thin enough to see through. The house closes next month. I don't remember making the offer, but I saw the paperwork in the system yesterday, my name, the address, the deed transfer, and the date on it was the date from the page. The exact date. I should be terrified. I'm not. I'm organized. I'm filed. I'm in the right place in the sequence, and the sequence is almost complete, and the only thing left in the pending column is the date with no document type and the words "See attached," and I don't know what the attachment is, but I know it's coming, and I know that when it arrives it will be correct, and I will process it the way I've processed everything else. Carefully, precisely, and without hesitation. because that is what I was hired to do, and that is what the system requires, and that is what I have always, from the very beginning, been for. I found one more thing. Last Friday, after everyone else had gone home, I went down to the basement. One last time, not to the slot, to the general storage shelves. I pulled the oldest box I could find, 1879, the year the building opened. Inside were the first documents ever filed in this office. Deeds, mostly, land transfers, property surveys. At the bottom of the box, beneath everything else, was a single sheet of paper in handwriting I didn't recognize. It wasn't a county form, it was a list. Names, in a column, in fading ink. I counted them. 47 names. Beside each name was a date range, 2 dates, separated by a dash. Birth and death. I assumed. I scanned the list looking for something I recognized. The names were old: Ezekiel, Prudence, Thaddeus, Constance, the names of people who built the building, who established the county, who created the system. At the bottom of the list, the handwriting changed. The ink was darker, newer. The names were modern. I found Linda's name. Beside it, a date range. The first date was her birthday. The second was 4 years ago, the date from the death certificate she'd burned. But she was still alive. The second date had been crossed out and replaced with a new one. Further in the future, written in ink, I recognized a dot. It was the ink from the county stamp pads we use at the front desk. The same ink I use every day. Below Linda's name, in the same modern hand, was mine. Olenek Mara Elise. The first date was my birthday. The second date was 14 months from now. The date from the pending column. And the handwriting, I looked at it for a long time, holding the paper up to the fluorescent light, comparing the loops and slants to the handwriting I see every day on my own intake forms, in my own notes, in my own signature on the chain of custody logs. It was mine. The entry was in my handwriting. I don't remember writing it. But I know the system doesn't make errors. I know every entry in this office is made by a clerk. And I know now that the catalog doesn't predict, it assigns. And somewhere in the process of maintaining the index, I became the hand that writes. The entries, including my own, including the one that hasn't happened yet, including the attachment I still can't see. I put the page back in the box. I put the box back on the shelf. I turned off the basement lights. I went upstairs, and I locked the building, and I drove home through streets that felt like columns in a ledger, past houses that felt like entries, under a sky that looked, for just a moment, like the inside of a filing cabinet, dark and ordered, and infinitely deep, with a slot of light at the far end that could have been a door or a mail drop or the gap between one record and the next. I go back to work tomorrow. I always go back to work tomorrow. But tonight I checked my card one last time, took it from the locked drawer. The pending column still shows 3 entries: the deed, the name, the date. Something had changed. Below "C attached," in type so small, I needed my desk lamp, was a line I'd never seen before. Maybe it had always been there. Attachment on file, see permanent index. I turned the card over. The back had always been blank. It wasn't blank anymore. A single line centered in my handwriting. I don't know when I wrote it. I don't know how. It says, position, permanent, not the job title, not sealed record specialist, not clerk, permanent, like the index, like the apparatus beneath the foundation, like the founders whose files are complete and who are part of the building now. Maybe literally, the draft is warm tonight. It comes up through the floor and it smells like paper and limestone and something underneath that I used to think was chalk but isn't. It's calcium. It's bone. It's what you become when your file is complete and your position is permanent. And the index absorbs you the way it absorbs every draft copy once the final version arrives. I'm not afraid. I'm filed, and the system doesn't make errors.